Hi, hello, welcome to my channel. I'm Emerald. Today I have a very exciting video because I'm doing my 2023 reading wrap up. It's a little less exciting because I only read 15 books, but you know what? At least I'm reading. That's what I'm telling myself. So without further ado, I am gonna jump right into my least favorite book of the year, Bliss Montage. Everybody hyped this book up so much. I saw it all over Instagram and I should love it. It's a short story collection centered around women and it's supposed to be very like surreal and zany, but most of the stories really just miss the mark for me. I'm not spoiling anything, this is on the back of the book, but there's one story where the girl's boyfriend is a Yeti and it's not even like a fun story to read. It feels like the author was just taking normal boring stories and then playing Mad Libs and being like, instead of her banker boyfriend, it's a Yeti boyfriend. But the entire story is just this man doing boring things and it doesn't even feel surreal. I had so much hope for this book and it just fell flat. So I gave Bliss Montage a 4 out of 10 stars. And then after that, I put The Invention of Morel. This was a very small translated classic. I only read it because this author inspired a lot of contemporary magic realism Latin authors. So I really liked kind of seeing where they got their inspiration from, but it was nothing to write home about. It was just a cute little easy to digest classic. And overall, it was a fun time. I gave it 6 out of 10 stars because it was a good story. It just it was okay. It didn't wow me, but again, it was a good book. So if you're a fan of Marquez and those guys, I would definitely pick it up. It's such a quick read. It only took me like an hour, so I definitely think it's worth it. It's not as memorable and it's lower down on this list. Up next, I read Yerba, Buena. This was a cute little wholesome lesbian love story about these two girls with very different backgrounds. It was told by both girls' perspectives. It would switch back and forth and you slowly get to see in a series of flashbacks kind of their upbringing and how they both got to Los Angeles and how they ended up meeting each other. And as their relationship goes on, you kind of see where all these little miscommunications start happening, but the context of their childhood makes it make a lot more sense. So it just overall painted a really nice, thorough love story. Overall, it was super cute. I'm just not the biggest fan of romance, so I gave it a 6.5, but I think it's a good story that almost anyone would enjoy. The next book on this list is The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and I know this is super low and everybody loves this book and I really enjoy it. I just read a lot of Taylor Jenkins Reid this year and it wasn't one of my favorites. I feel like her other books really outshone. This book follows a Hollywood starlet in like the 50s and 60s and it goes through each one of her 7 husbands and gives the backstory behind them. And overall, it just weaves this really beautiful tale and also sad tale about this young girl kind of having to do what she had to do to be a star in Hollywood then. It was still a super great book. It's just, I also read Daisy Jones and Carrie Soto and I both love those books a lot more. And then I read Malibu Rising last year, which I also adored. So this one, it was still a great book. It was just kind of like, so I gave it a 7. I'm sorry, but it was still fun. It's a great time. It's still written by Taylor Jenkins Reid, so it's like eating candy, but not as good as some of her other ones. This is where the books get really good and I feel bad that they're technically still low on the list, but again, it's because I read a lot of good books. So the next book is A Little Luck and it was a great book, but it was just a little bit slow and I ate it up. I read it in only a few days, but it just wasn't my favorite of the year. It was definitely really beautiful. It follows this woman who goes back to her hometown and is kind of forced to confront a really traumatic event that happened. And the way the book slowly feeds the memories back to you because she's repressed a lot of them is just such a unique experience, and it made for such an interesting book because it has such a unique narrative and structure that it really felt like you were picking apart at wounds with her. And of course it was a really sad book and a really slow book. It was beautiful and I think it's a book that everybody should give a chance. It's just I wasn't really in in like a slow, sad reading mood this year, so it kind of put me in a slump and it just wasn't right for this timing. But again, it's a very beautiful book that I definitely recommend, and I gave it a 7.5. And another book that is kind of similar that I also gave 7.5 is The Girls, and I love this book. It was so beautifully written. It's a retelling of the Charles Manson murders, but from the perspective of one of the girls from the cult. So it definitely had to do with a lot of themes of like girlhood. This book is about girlhood and very just sad, sweaty, awkward, romantic adolescence, which I ate up. But again, it was a little bit slow for my liking, even though it was a book and topics that I'm like obsessed with. So it was super beautiful, super well written, just again, I didn't really read it in the right time for me. That's why I gave it a 7.5. I'm sorry. And then my next book is Mexican Gothic. This book wasn't like as beautifully written as A Little Life or The Girls. It was just kind of fun, and I missed having a book that I just like devour in one day. So this is technically like a gothic horror book. It didn't feel super horror-y, like I wasn't scared. It was more surreal, and it follows our main character who is Hispanic, and she goes to kind of rescue her cousin from her cousin's marriage. And the cousin marries into this really creepy European family. They have this like creepy mansion on the hill, and they're like low-key into eugenics, and like they never leave the house, and it was just like all of the unsettling things that she could write about, she wrote about, and it was just good. I couldn't put it down. I had a lot of fun with it, and it was just like kind of a nice, campy, over-the-top book. I was really excited to kind of have more of the scenery of Mexico and those aspects, but it wasn't at all. It was like a very European book, which I'm okay with because it was just a fun ride. I gave this book a 7.8 because again, it was just fun. It's what I wanted this year, and it was great. And then my next book was All's Well by Awad, and I have for some reason a soft spot in my heart for Awad. Her writing's all over the place. It's not writing that I feel like would hold up critically, but her books and her concepts are really fun, and that's true for this book. This book follows a theater teacher teaching a college course, yet this teacher has severe chronic illness, and some weird, surreal things start happening, and the tides kind of turn, and this woman who is really resentful of her students because they're so young and naive and disrespectful, things start switching, and all of a sudden she's the one who's full of life and joy. And it was just a very interesting character study. Any of my girls with chronic illness, I feel like, would love this book and eat it up. I kind of thought it was a little bit satisfying to see, and it was just like the author wrote all those nasty, jealous thoughts that you get about people who don't take care of their bodies or utilize their bodies, and she just wrote all those nasty thoughts out, and it was kind of satisfying reading that. I don't think that this was like the most well-written book ever, but I loved the concept and I had a really fun time reading it, so I gave it a 8.4. The next book that I read was Daisy Jones and the Six, and I completely understand why this is one of her most popular books. It was so much fun to read. It was a retelling of a fictitious band in the 60s and 70s in LA, and the entire book is just like interview transcripts almost. Each of the band members spliced together into this narrative, and it's just their accounts of what was happening. It was just so fun. I could not put it down. It reminded me a little bit of Where'd You Go, Bernadette, where again, that was a really uniquely written book that I just flew through because I thought it was a fun time. So, and I gave this book a 8.4 because it was just a fun time. It was like exactly what I wanted to be reading. So, and now I'm in my top 5 books that I read this year. On the number 5 spot, I have Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. And this was just such a fun, beautiful book, and I get why it had so much hype this this last year. I read it in like a day. The whole story is around these two people who met when they were kids and bonded over a love of video games. And as they grow up, they kind of lose touch, and then through a random chance encounter, they meet each other again and start producing games. And these two just create this entire beautiful world together, and things start getting complicated. It's kind of a love story, kind of not, and this book really has everything. It has love, it has death, it has growing up, it has family dynamics. It just covers a wide array of topics in a way that isn't overwhelming, and you really feel like you're just growing up with these two characters. And it's just beautiful. It was just a lovely story. I get why everybody says that's a story that will stick with you for a very long time. It's just beautiful, well-rounded characters, and the ending will rip your absolute heart out, so don't say that I didn't warn you. And then my number 4 book is Carrie, Soto is Back. I don't know why I like this book so much. I think it's because I just like angry woman stories, but oh my god, I just ate this book up. This is a Taylor Jenkins Reid book that follows Carrie Soto, who is a professional tennis player, and she's in her 40s, and basically everybody is telling her that she can't play tennis anymore. So she decides to win everything, of course. And it's a really, really visceral book. It is so closely following Carrie. You don't really get anybody else's perspectives, that you really get to feel all of her emotions when she's winning these games, all of her self-doubt, all of her self-confidence. And it was just a really fun character study. Like, when you read this book, you feel it in your heart, and I'm just love that. And I feel like Taylor Jenkins Reid does a really good job at writing female characters that don't have very traditional plots, where she writes these characters who come out the gate with a lot of self-confidence, which I just adore, because usually female characters have to like gain their own self-confidence, and they hate themselves in the beginning, and then they have this beautiful arc. But Reid's characters just come out the gate knowing that they're the shit, knowing that they deserve the world, knowing that they're hard workers, knowing that they're talented, and then it's up to them to just further like express themselves, which I think is really refreshing, and I loved it. And that was what this book was about, was like a really strong character just saying fuck you even harder and louder, which I appreciated. So I gave this book an 8.5 because, again, it's just what I like. It wasn't as popular as a lot of her other books, and I completely understand it, but again, it's what I love, so that's why I rated it so highly. Alright, so my number 3 book that I read was Cleopatra and Frankenstein, and this was a book that got a lot of hype but also had an equal amount of people hating on it, and I for one loved it. It's a debut novel, so it's not like incredible, but I just love the characters. And I know that I had a little bit of like an emotional bias when reading this book because I was going through similar things as Cleo, our main character, and I just loved reading her perspective on it, and it felt like a really realistic love story. And basically this book is about Cleo and Frankie and their kind of fucked up relationship. They meet on the street one day, and Cleo needs a green card, so they just immediately elope, and then kind of chaos ensues. Cleo is this like young 20-something independent artist who's really eccentric and just fun-loving and all over the place. And then Frankie is this 40-year-old man who works at an ad agency who's kind of just a man baby, and the whole book is just about their fucked up relationship and fucked up friends. These are some of the absolute worst characters, and I think that's what makes it so realistic. I read a lot of these like 20-something-year-old coming to age girl books, and I'm kind of disappointed a lot of times because they just don't hit. They're not like fun. It's a lot of telling, not showing, but this book hit. Like, this book felt accurate. Everybody was just a fucking mess, and it was so fun to read, and I just ate it up. So I loved this book. It felt like hot girl shit in New York and was like genuinely messy, which is impressive. So I gave this book a 8.6. I know a lot of people will think that it belongs lower down on this list, but again, I loved it. I related to it. I thought it was fun, so sue me. This is my channel. And the second book on this list is Wild Milk, and this was a truly zany collection of short stories. I read almost exclusively weird books, but this is probably the most weird book I've ever read, which is very surprising to me. The way the author uses language makes you feel like you're having a stroke, but in the best way possible. Her stories are a collection of stories based off of fairy tales, actually. So a lot of these stories follow the cadence and the rhythm of fairy tales, the repetition, the very simple connections that are made during fairy tales and like folklore in general, and just makes it 10 times more bizarre, and I loved it. If you're into really weird short stories, then this is like the mega boss of very weird short stories. A lot of people are gonna read it and absolutely hate it and want to pour bleach on their eyes, but I loved it because it was surprising and new. There's something about this book that just like I think is the coolest thing ever, and I don't know if it's just because I'm weird or what, but I loved it. If you want like a weird little mindfuck, I really recommend reading it, and I want to hear if you do read about it, because I don't know if I'm just like weird with weird taste or what, but I just like can't stop thinking about it. It's great. So I gave it an 8.9 just because it's like I haven't been phased like how this book phases me in a long time, and just yes, I love it. Give it to me. And then actually finally my favorite book of this year will come to no surprise to anybody, but it's Lauren Groff's Faster Wild. Lauren Groff to me is like how Sally Rooney is to Aunt Carly. Lauren Groff can do anything and I will eat it up, but she doesn't just do anything. She releases absolute bangers, and I cannot emphasize how good this book is. I think about it constantly. It takes everything in me not to just reread it right now. Lauren Groff is such a master when it comes to writing female characters, and she's such a master in doing really elegant appreciation and also criticism of Christianity. And this book just combines all of it. It follows our main character, who is this little girl who is born into a servant family, and it basically follows her getting roped into kind of like Jamestown, Mayflower, like original 13 colonies, all of that bullshit there. She was a little British servant and she gets sent over to colonize the US. And her colony is experiencing a famine, so instead of just laying there and dying because she knows that she's just a servant, they're not gonna feed her, she goes and flees and tries to survive in the woods by herself in wintertime. And it is just such a good book. It's probably the best ending of any book I've read. I want to talk about it, but I'm not gonna spoil it for you. But by that end scene, you are just so in this little girl's perspective, and you are so tired with her and hurt that you are just like giving up on everything. It's just one of the most beautiful poetic books. There are so many sentences and quotes that just are burned into my brain. Lauren Groff's one of the only authors where I remember word for word passages from her books. And if you're more interested in this book, I have a even longer review on my last book video. I don't think that it's okay for me to talk about this book for 20 minutes twice. Everyone's probably sick of it, but I cannot explain to you how much I love this book. I didn't think that Lauren Groff could get better after The Matrix, and then she wrote this. And before The Matrix, I didn't think that she'd get better after Florida, and then she wrote The Matrix. So she's just like getting better every single year, and I'm just gobbling it up. So, oh yeah, and to me, that book is a perfect 10 out of 10. Those were all the books I read this year. I think I only read 14. I might have said 15 in the beginning, but I don't know, I'm a liar, I guess, but counting my spreadsheet, it is only 14. You know what? I read for pleasure. I abandon a lot of books when I'm not feeling them, so at the end of the year, I don't read a lot. That's okay, because I have a fun time doing it anyways. And yeah, let me know if you read any of those books. Let me know what your favorite books of this year was. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye!